Okay, in this video we're going to talk about prototyping. So we're going to talk about where we are now, which is that we have some initial paper-based prototypes or ideas, and talk about how we progress them through various iterations to get to our high fidelity prototype version. So where are we now? We have a representation of our idea. A prototype itself can vary in the complexity that it has when it creates or demonstrates this idea. So what we have now is quite a simple implementation of our prototype. But the question is really, how much is enough when it comes to prototyping? So that's how much is enough. How many iterations do I need on my paper version? How many iterations do I need on the final thing? At what point do I move from one type of thing to the next? And that's really something that when things are starting to reach some maturity, some saturation, we move on and we verify again. So here is an example. So you should hopefully recognize this kind of format on the left-hand side. And this was something that was taken from a design sprint. And the design sprint was about something to support open days. So not necessarily an online one, but something that could be present. And this is designing a TV screen that can be used. So this here is something like a screen that's presented. There's an alternative that you can view it on a phone, and it's just a journey map through level 1 to 4 of an undergraduate degree. So this is kind of really a very crude version of wireframes. You've got some ideas of where a person's photograph would be, which would be something like this. You've got this would be a video, this would be a paragraph of text, and there's some annotation to explain what would go in there. Hopefully you're at a position where you've got something more akin to actual content that you can go in there, but this is an example of one type of paper prototype. This is another example. This is from the dentist. So we had the persona example of Stephen the dentist. This is something that came out of that project in terms of method for people to communicate with dentists. So on the left, you've got the initial sketch idea, and then on the right, you have what it ended up being. So you can see that there were a few different changes along the way. For example, we added arrows as well as the swiping option. We removed the video, that sort of thing. The consultation is now hidden behind the consultation button. So you can see there's been an iteration from what is kind of a low fidelity to what is probably a mid fidelity. So it's a more complete representation, but it's not a full implementation yet. This is another version that came from the same idea. And you can see on the left, we've got this idea of prototyping with stuff. So we gave dental nurses, we gave them a whole bunch of just kind of arts and crafts stuff and let them create something. And then over time that's evolved into, okay, we like the idea of these kind of hotspots, which will now be buttons that are on there. And again, it depends on, this is very much on the right hand side, an implementation for someone with learning difficulties compared to the one on the left, but the content is the same. So all of these things very neatly fit largely in this low fidelity aspect, which is at the left hand side, where things are clearly an abstraction. Things are clearly some paper prototyping. We don't really have content in there. We know what's going to go in there, but it's not been explored. We've created it with paper prototyping, some sketches, pen and paper, maybe something like PowerPoint or Keynote to create an initial wireframe. To move on from that, the first stage that we want to do is we've got an idea of what that interface looks like, but do we really know what the interaction is? So the next stage is to move into mid-fidelity prototypes where we can still work with our paper versions, but we start to add those interactions. Now we can do that by drawing arrows on the paper, but that's not really giving that same level of interaction. So to do that, we're linking things. So you can use hyperlinks within PowerPoint or Keynote, or you can use something like Marvel or Pop. So one bought the other, and so you just really need to use one. I suggest you use Marvel because that has some built-in stuff for actually creating the design as well as working with your own photographs. From there, you can move on to creating high fidelity prototypes, which are really as close to the real thing as you can be. So we have an interactive prototype. Sometimes it's a coded solution, HTML, JavaScript, CSS, but it's probably not linked to a database. It's probably not linked to the data that's going to drive such a system, but it looks and feels the part. The look and feel is there. So there's a whole bunch of different systems that you can use to do that. Obviously, HTML stack is one. We are going to use Adobe XD. Other ones that exist are Balsamiq, Axure, UXPin, and OmniGraffle. And these are ones that are used quite widely within industry. What you tend to find is that the groups of people who are more designy will tend to use Adobe XD. Axure is a bit more clunky, but has more logic behind it, for example, so you can do a lot more conditional behaviors. So Adobe XD you can download from the university when you sign in. Sign in with your university email address, and that will automatically trigger the single sign-on option, so anyone can download it on their own device. So how do we get to a mid-fidelity prototype? What am I talking about there? So Marvel is the system that you should use for this as a starting point. There are many systems. I can support Marvel, and I've got a demonstration using Marvel, so I've got a video which is available separately, just showing me taking pictures and how to add the hotspots and that sort of stuff. So the key thing here is that I have interactivity, but I do not have logic-based interactivity support. So I can't necessarily make different interaction paths based on user input, but I can probably demonstrate it. And Marvel itself is going to allow me to share my prototypes online, allow other people to comment on them, and I can start to get kind of little hotspots of areas that I should pay attention to, because that's where people are commenting. So what you should do now is you have your prototype sketches. Why not go and create an interactive prototype in Marvel, run it through and see if it makes sense when it's actually being interacted with as opposed to laid out flat on a bit of paper. So things to think about: do I need to include all the links and functionality that I've included? Were my ideas for interactivity sensible? Perhaps it's overly complicated, or you've missed a step, you might want to break it down. So use this opportunity to make adjustments within the team if you encounter any issues. So this is really going to be your first iteration based on your own experience of whether that design makes sense. You can also explore Marvel using their wireframe option. So that's available both on the mobile app and on their website. And you can, I'm pointing at a mobile phone. I realise use it on the app. But use it on the app or the website. And you can create your own wireframes from scratch, which allows you to add something perhaps a little closer to the look and feel that you might not get from taking photographs of your paper option. I think it's a useful experience for you to try and create a few sketches just to really experience the simplicity of it and how quickly you can create something. So what you're really testing here is, I've got my sketches, so is it clear from those what I need to create where? Are they clear enough that I can now implement it in a different system and it will still make sense? And then we can start to explore, well, it says there's a picture here. What picture should I find and where should I put it? So making sure that you have appropriate content and images, that you have all the permissions. So if you have images, make sure they're Creative Commons or they are your own images that you're happy to include. Don't just go pull things off of Google unless you know what the licensing is for that image. So we're testing at this point really, can I take my sketches into an implementation, albeit a very simple wireframe type layout within Marvel. So once I've got that, hopefully you're going to iron out a good few issues there in terms of the interactivity. It's just a different experience when you're using it rather than looking at it. Once we've got that, we're now in a strong position that we can start to explore high fidelity options. So we are going to use Adobe XD in this class, and what that allows you to do is to design things, again using a similar but perhaps more layers of complexity option with Marvel. you can create things inside Adobe XD, or you can pull in like photographs and background images and that sort of stuff. From there, you can start to create similar like hotspots and links from one object to another page and start to prototype that interactivity, and then you can share it. So I've got Adobe XD on my phone, so I can send the prototype to my phone and I can play around with it there, so I can actually see it on a real device rather than a simulated device on the screen. That's super helpful when it comes to things like, is my button in a good place? So if someone's having real issue getting to a button, perhaps you can just move it to the middle and it will solve the problem. So by just watching people or having your own go at operating something on your phone, it makes a big difference. So that value holds true with Adobe XD as well. So do we remember this example from before? So this is the example of something to support the open day, and it's got the university student kind of timeline on there. So this is what was developed and created, and this was actually, Mandar did this as an internship. So he's run through almost like a variation of the design sprint and created this at the end. So I want to show you roughly what that looks like on Adobe XD. So if I, in Adobe XD, share that, that's just going to open elsewhere. Let me pull the window across. It's just merrily loading away. I just have to empty that. So it's going to adjust to my screen, and I'll just let it load for a little second just because I've pulled it across, it doesn't like it. Okay, so if I click somewhere, I get this same thing that I had with Marvel. So I've got this touch screen that came up because people didn't know they could touch the screen. So imagine this is on like a touch screen and I'm pressing the button. So touch again. I can see where I can click, so I can click on year one or I can click on either of these two students. So I click on year one and I start to get, okay, here's some information about what level one is about. There's a video here which will show and play, and I can hear about different students. So if I click this John David student, I get a story about him. Again, there's a video that I can play and so on. I can go back to the overview and pick someone different, so I can find out about this other person. And so all of this was created in Adobe XD. So the idea is that it would then be implemented within a more intensive option, a more interactive. It would be created within something like JavaScript to run the system. But already we've got a really good interaction that I can see. This one doesn't really need any logic. It's purely clicking on things to get more information and go back. So it lends itself really well to an interactive prototype version. So that is the end of the presentation on prototyping. You can go ahead now and download Marvel onto phones or use it on a laptop or desktop. Try it on different devices if you can. Chat to other people in your group, find out what they're experiencing, if they're doing it on a tablet and you're doing it on a phone, that sort of thing. From there, you can start to try and replicate that within the very simple editing tool that Marvel has, and just go and explore Marvel and see what's out there. If you find any other interesting, mid-fidelity systems, then share them in the team and we can all have a look. We're done.